Well, if you're listening, folks, you made it to Wednesday, August the 16th. 46 years ago today, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, passed away. But fear not, it is I, your host, Jared A. Chambers, here with another episode of Command Briefing. Yeah, welcome to the show, folks. It is Wednesday, which means it's hump day, so I hope you've been happily humping. Now that you're done with that, let's talk about Fulton County. Let's talk about the cities. Let's talk about the huge, amazing jam that we're in against people that probably couldn't hold down your job. People who aren't really qualified to do much. I have a little status report for you, and when we have good news, I like to share good news with you. I like to share a realistic look at all of the news. Sometimes it is my duty, my job in doing this. It is the command briefing. I am bringing you a report, a situation analysis from the front lines of things. And so it is my sad duty to report to you, right now, as of today, we're losing, folks. We don't have the momentum. It is the other team that has the momentum. It is the Jack Smith, the Fannie Willises of the world who have the momentum. Even Joe Biden, who's falling apart at the seams, he has the momentum. You know, you look at the polling out there. Think about every crazy thing that's happened in the last 2.5 years. Inflation sky high, the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, the inability to afford food, housing, automobiles, transportation. The insecurity in which we find ourselves vis-a-vis Russia, the potential of nuclear war, all of the things going on, a DOJ that has put American citizens behind bars for the entire 2.5 years with no trial date set, with no attempt even at speedy trials and justice. Things are bad. You know things are bad. And yet still, Joe Biden should be languishing in the single digits. Even if we had lost a lot of the country, he should be in the teens, maybe the 20s. Once upon a time, that would have been the case. But look, even in the head-to-head matchups, which Trump is doing extraordinarily well in, you know this. He is doing better in head-to-head matchups than he did in 16 or 20. So the analysis that he can't win a general election against Joe Biden is facile. It is stupid. However, wouldn't you like to think that there's better margin than a couple of points? Wouldn't you like to think, given that everything you know about the country and how widespread the pain is and the dire situation in which we find ourselves as a nation, wouldn't you like to think that you weren't betting on turnout alone to overcome fraud in 2024? No, Biden's hanging in there. And look, having an approval rating in the low to mid 40s is nothing to brag about. We know that. That's pretty awful. And he has high unfavorables. That's nice. But still, you have a man who stands a very good chance in an election because his floor is probably around 42, 43%, even on the worst possible day. That's where we find ourselves. And why is that? You know, this going on with Fulton County really got me thinking back over the last couple of days to the special grand jury that was impaneled in 2021, going into 2022. And this was the special grand jury is what Fani Willis set up to do the investigatory work of the election and Donald Trump. You'll remember, even if you don't remember everything about that special grand jury, you'll remember the young lady who was the foreman of that special grand jury, plastered all over in MSNBC, who really immediately, on day one of their work being done, decided to go out and make a mockery of it by just revealing to the public how vapid she is and was. You wouldn't let her babysit your kids. If your child, your adult child, was friends with her, you would want them to seek other friends. If your son, if your adult son brought her home for Thanksgiving and said, "Mom, Dad, this is my gal," you would have a heart attack because she is utterly silly and vapid. She was totally caught up in the 15 minutes of fame. She was totally caught up in this idea of fame coming from the work that they were doing and rubbing shoulders in the work of the grand jury, possibly with getting Trump in to testify. Totally starstruck and just really part of the moment. And we can laugh at her. We can mock her. And I don't get me wrong, I do encourage doing both of those things. Laugh at her, mock her. But also take seriously where we are. Because I have a sad story to tell you that is tied into all of this. Is that Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler there is hardly alone. She has lots of friends because, you see, she went to a good college. She got out of that good college and was well networked and got good jobs places. Just like many, many other people just like her. They were indoctrinated growing up. They were indoctrinated in college. They continued their indoctrination by the associates and friends they made, the extracurricular activities they did. Then they go out into the workforce, more indoctrination. You talk about the woke companies out there. They work hand in hand with people like Miss Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler, because that's part of their recruitment process. This is how they get loyal talent who won't leave them. They feed their egos. If those people care about so-called social justice, they are going to care about it too. It's all marketing, recruitment, retaining talent. And no matter what you would like to think, yes, I know, I just said it, she's vapid. Vapid in civics, vapid in human relations, vapid in logic and reasoning skills and judgment. But I guarantee you, going to the right schools and having the right background, she is a perfectly good cog in somebody's machine. And that is what the system has been pumping out, is good cogs in the machine that keep it operating, well-oiled, clicking along, and them making money, but at a cost. These people have influence over so much of our lives. This one Crazy Eyes has influence over what is about to happen to our entire country, which, if you haven't noticed, these are unprecedented times. These are uncharted waters. When you throw out 247 years of legal precedent around the idea of presidential immunity and start politicizing and criminalizing the lawful acts, the lawful execution of presidential power, you can't hold together very long. Because where does that end? There is no logical end to it once you open that Pandora's box. You get a president who starts a war somewhere and people die, charge him with murder. You know, they would have loved to have done that to George W. Bush, and hey, some part of me says maybe that was warranted. But that's not how the system works. The system says if you have a president who commits a high crime or misdemeanor in the execution of his office, you impeach him. And that is the tool that nobody, especially in the Republican Party, wants to touch. But yet they're going to remain hands-off as local prosecutors and special prosecutors start prosecuting the very act of lawfully executing power of the presidency. That's where we are. They're winning because we have vested so much power in these people. And it's not just Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler who was the foreman of that grand jury. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution today. One snuck glances at news sites throughout the day. Another stayed up late to watch Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's press conference. A third went to bed early and woke up to dozens of text messages. That's how 3 of the Fulton County residents who served on the special grand jury that helped Willis examine evidence of interference in Georgia's 2020 election found out that former President Donald Trump and 18 others had been indicted on racketeering and other criminal charges. In exclusive interviews with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the 3 jurors who requested anonymity out of concern for their safety and privacy described the surreal experience of watching Willis and her team announce the charges late Monday. The 98-page indictment heavily references evidence and testimony the special grand jury had heard firsthand behind closed door last year, they said. Quote, I've tried to just move on a little bit, but last night definitely put into perspective how different this indictment is compared to every other one that's come across, one juror said Tuesday. Quote, I think it made me realize I was part of something really unique. Unquote. That begins that article, and it goes on with similar sentiments. These folks are absolutely enamored with the idea that they are creating brand new legal precedent. They have no idea of the Pandora's box which they have opened, that them standing up for their own political beliefs and pursuing justice are actually one and the same thing. There's no daylight between those two. I pursue justice. I push my political point of view. Because to them, those are not two different things. Their political opinions are not opinions. To them, they are facts. It is religion to them. And I guarantee you, all of them look a whole lot like Miss Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler. And they too, while being vapid in so many ways, also are very powerful where they live, having good jobs, having wealth, having money from those jobs, and now, through the system, able to exercise influence over the entire nation. Folks, something has to change about that, and it has to change fast. We're going to talk more about that after the break. Stay with us. Hang in there. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging in through the break. So now that we have relived those moments from May of last year, remembering Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler, real name Emily Kors, by the way, if you have forgotten her. And again, most of these other folks on that special grand jury had the sense to remain anonymous, and I get why. I mean, they're crazy, they're nuts, but deep down they realize they are exercising power in a way that puts them at risk. She was too vapid to realize that. She was too caught up in the moment. But even those who wish to remain anonymous, they're very eager for their report, which has remained under seal. They're very excited about the prospect of that coming out. They want to show the world the work they did. Yes, they're very proud of this. They think of it as a project that they've completed. Again, they have a very different view than you do. You look at work you do and your identity as a person and your opinions as being maybe related, but not all one and the same. Their identity, who they are, the work that they do, their political beliefs, everything, it is religion to them. This is their meaning in life. And what do we do about it? You know, for a long time out there, and I've been frustrated with this for a very long time now, you get these clickbaiting types in the influencer movement, the conservative influencer movement, who've talked about this idea of national divorce. And in theory, it sounds great. We're two different types of people. We can't get along. We have different values. We want different things. We have different ideas about the law. We are no longer a nation. So we should get divorced. Irreconcilable differences. What this ignores is human nature. First of all, there are no examples of peaceful national divorces. And why is that? Because they need us. That is their movement, by the way. It is to control. They're not looking to do communism or fascism as a thought exercise. No, you need subjects to do it. You need people that you can control to do it. These people, they think that they're all the elite ruling class. They're not the bourgeois. They need you. And if live and let live would actually suffice, our system of federalism would actually work out quite well. California could do California things, Georgia could do Georgia things, and so forth and so on. No, federalism does not work out well for them. Again, they need to exert control, and that is what they intend to do. So you can't really have a clean national divorce. And as I talked about before on this show, and I talk about all the time on Twitter, logistically, how would you do it anyway? People talk about red and blue states like those are clean lines, and they're not, because really every blue state has huge pockets of rural population, which is much more conservative than the urban population. It's urban versus rural, and those lines get really hard to make clear. So some people have backed off of this idea of national divorce a bit, but they're still very much with the idea of balkanization. Meaning, let's start the split in a soft divorce. In fact, since we're going with the divorce analogy, let's call it a separation. Mommy and Daddy are going to start sleeping in separate rooms, which means that Mommy gets to keep the urban area master bedroom, while Daddy is going to sleep in the rural guest room. Don't worry, kids. It's not your fault. We just need Mommy and Daddy to stop fighting so much. Okay. So how does that work across time? Mommy's master bedroom has the corporate infrastructure. It has the transportation infrastructure. It has the economics. It has access to lots of people to get things done. Sure, there's some things in Daddy's guest room that they would still like access to in the master. You know, there are all of those sweet farms out there that make the food. There are all of those truckers out there who need to get things from different corners of the country to the cities, not just for people to consume, but also for manufacturing, all sorts of other things. And what you find is we're still very much connected in certain ways, even through the separation. But what have we gained? They in the cities still have a certain upper hand, and we're seeing that play out now. So people who have advocated for balkanization, here's a clue. It's already happened. Do you think Fulton County and the special grand jury or the indicting grand jury or the actual jury who will hear this case, do you think it will have any of me and you on it? No. And so how does somebody who doesn't even live in one of these places, how do you get a trial by a jury of your peers when you know that these people are not your peers? Peers implies that they have something in common with you. And that is what juries were about from the beginning. That your fellow citizens were different than the government. Because your fellow citizens care about the same interests that you do in terms of government power being abused. And so that your fellow citizens would give you a fair shake in front of the government, if for nothing else, for fear that if they didn't, that such power would be used against them, as it has historically been throughout history. But now that's not true with the balkanization and the brainwashing in the urban centers of growing up in the system and learning the system's ways. These folks are one and the same as the government. It has always been said that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich if they were asked to. It's a funny little analogy, but a lot of truth to it. But it's gotten worse. See, once upon a time, of course, there was a bias to a grand jury. They're only hearing one side of the case, and they only have to decide not whether a person is absolutely guilty, but whether there is enough there in substance to proceed with a trial. Very low standard, and they hear one side of the case. So it's a pretty biased system already. But now, as you see in this AJC article, as you saw with Crazy Eyes McBunny-Boiler last year, now they consider themselves in partnership with the government, that what they need to do is punish their political adversary because they don't like what he said. Yes, it is no more complicated than that. He said he actually won the election, and by golly, that makes them angry. How dare he say that he won the election? I know he didn't win the election, because I watched TV and they told me that there were 60 some odd cases and courts rejected all of them. Not a one on the merits. The merits have never been heard. This is how powerful cognitive dissonance is, and these people do not want to hear anything other than Joe Biden won fair and square, and they are angry that somebody can come along and say something different. How is that legal? How can they go on Twitter and ask their people to watch a hearing on One America News Network or Newsmax? How can a president have his chief of staff ask for someone's phone number with the express purpose of calling that person to once again say, hey, I think if you look into this, I think you'll see I actually won this state. That's what they have never wanted to do, and what they have stonewalled on for 2.5 years is not, we'll have a debate about this and win. They simply refuse the debate. They won't let you see the ballots. And they are in control of all of this. But we balkanized, and they're winning. You thought that you could go to your corner and be safe. People like Jenna Ellis thought, hey, if nothing else, I can switch teams now and go back to being an establishment hack like I was back in 2016 when I was against Trump. Let me just wind back the clock and pretend all of this never happened, and things can go back like they were. But no, those folks in those cities, they have real power now, and they're realizing it. They have numbers, and they have a system, and they've elected politicians which they can organize around, and they can push around anybody in the country that they want. Even if you're a DA in Fulton County, Georgia, you can reach your tentacles into Coffee County, Georgia, where you have no jurisdiction. You can reach out into the Georgia State Capitol, where you have no jurisdiction. You can meddle in matters of federal, not state law. And nobody stands in your way because you have organized, and there is no conservative that is going to beat you in your next election. We can talk about, hey, let's run somebody against Fannie Willis in the next DA election in Fulton County. And you know what that is a setup for, everyone? That is a setup for conservatives to throw good money after bad and just burn it. That is not a plan. You've got to have something better than this. Because, folks, if you take back the cities, you'll take back the country. You'll get Joe below that low 40s floor. You'll get him down in the 20s where he should be. You take back the cities, you take back the country. Stew on that a minute. We're going to take another break, and we're going to be right back. Join me, everyone. Welcome back to Command Briefing. We're in the bottom of the hour now. We're talking about taking back the cities because of who controls the cities. A bunch of politicians that we can't outvote in those cities because they're elected by that circular system that they have set up with vapid young professionals and urbanites who will elect them and work in partnership with them to usurp authority from outlying rural areas, from the Constitution and the system of federalism that it is designed around. Folks, we're in real trouble because we're frankly flailing right now at the idea of going up against these cities, whether it's D.C. or Atlanta, Georgia, or Sacramento, California. Even in Texas. Look at Texas. Reliable red Texas. And look at Travis County and Austin and what it has become. The San Francisco of the Mid-South. I mean, it's crazy if you think about it. I mean, do you realize like how many technology companies have built up around there? Some moving out of places like California to take advantage of better tax structure, certainly taking advantage of red state offerings, but yet remaining politically reliably blue, reliably Democrat, and thus ends the idea that if you could just get people to move out of these hellholes, people tired of being taxed too much and homeless crapping the streets around them, that we'll build up our influence and have better political influence. And Texas will become the new California. Well, Texas becomes the new California all too literally. It doesn't become an all-powerful, hugely populated red state. No, it starts to turn just as blue as California. So this balkanization idea isn't working because we are in fact balkanizing. We are in fact balkanized. And what we've done is found ourselves out-influenced at every turn where we need to be. And so I think about, you think about, let's talk about Texas. Texas is, being a border state in the South. Remember back in the 80s, early 90s, remember killer bees? Remember all the horror stories about killer bees? And of course, they moved from warm tropical regions and entered the U.S., coming in from the very lowest, most southernmost points like Texas. And they spread on into the country, moving further north. And people became rightfully frightened of killer bees. And in fact, the name itself, killer bees, was a part of that panic around it. They were, in fact, a strain of honeybee. There are multiple strains of honeybees out there. If you're not a beekeeper, you have Italian bees, you have Russian varieties. There's multiple different varieties. And in fact, the honeybee is not native to North America at all. It comes from other parts of the world. You have other species of bees here, bumblebees, different pollinators. The honeybee was not native to North America. And there are different species from different parts of the world. And the really nasty ones that got the name killer bees originated from a strain out of Africa. And they weren't so much killer. They, too, desired to put up honey and build their colonies just like any other honeybee. But they became, by evolution, more aggressive because they had more to defend in the parts of the world that they came from. A little harder to come by those flowers full of nectar in harsher climates and regions in parts of Africa. They had to be more aggressive to survive in those harsher climates. And so, as they spread, those evolutionary characteristics that helped them to survive in those harsher climates also helped them thrive as they became introduced to new places. They're survivors at heart. That is what they are designed to do, and they are aggressive. And they started taking ground. And every once in a while, and it would come into the news, some poor hapless soul did what anyone could accidentally do. Outdoors, mowing the grass, driving around, doing their job outdoors, haplessly run into a colony, and those bees would attack. And when they attack with such singular focus that their victim very often suffers fatal wounds from the sheer number of stings that they receive. Too much venom for the body to handle. But have you noticed, as horrific as those stories were, and they were horrific, that they've kind of gone away over the past, 15, 20 years? When's the last time you heard about a killer bee attack? I bet you it's been a while. Bet you it's been a while since you even had a thought about those killer bees, huh? Well, what happened? Well, I know a little about this. I can tell you what happened. As they moved around, they bred with the other honeybees. See, that's how bees breed. New queens go out and they mate with drones from other colonies on their mating flight. and they mate with multiple drones, and they come back and they lay eggs for their life in the colony which they return to and take over. But as those killer bees meet up with some nice Italians or nice Russians, some of those genetic characteristics of the Africans get passed on to those other European strains which we're more familiar with in this country. But also, the African queens start to get characteristics of those more gentle varieties. And so when that Africanized queen returns to lay eggs in her hive, she's now delivering the product of mixed genetics of multiple species. And the strong points of their evolution begin to intertwine with the strong points of the Africanized bees. And yes, you may have a slightly more aggressive bee. You may not breed all of it out, but it does evolve, and it's no longer the threat that it once was. But you couldn't have had that if you just simply sought to quarantine Africanized bees wherever you would find them. If we said, okay, well, Africanized bees have made it up through Texas and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Florida, and we had made a law that said, guess what? Anybody else, if you have honeybees, you can no longer breed Russians or Italians or Carniolan bees in those states because it's too risky because of those Africanized. Don't keep bees in those states. We're going to make that illegal. These are now where the Africanized colonies are, and we can't risk breeding with those. We need to keep them separate. Well, guess what? Those Africanized bees would have retained their earlier genetics. And not only that, they would have continued to spread as they had before. It doesn't always make sense to quarantine a threat. Sometimes it does, but sometimes the reality is that a threat just simply cannot be contained. That there is no long-term containment strategy for a threat. And you got to come up with something different. And the something different is having equally powerful parallel structures. So, again, we are balkanized to a certain degree, but it doesn't have to end there. That shouldn't be the end of it. And when I said last week, take back the cities and you'll take back the country, I got some pushback from folks on it. I did. You know, I had people say, hey, look, go out in the country, raise some babies. That's your life. You're not getting the cities back. Just forget about it. Get real. And I understand their hopelessness, and I understand the desire just to have the best life that you can. I'm not a city person myself. I'd rather live out in the country. Nothing wrong with that. But what you can't do is just move to the country and then ride off the cities. You have to build powerful parallel systems and cultures. It is the systems that are powerful in the cities. It is the cultures that become powerful in the cities. They are like-minded. They have singular purpose, and they set up systems of mutual benefit for each other. And we have to start doing the same. Going to talk a little bit more about that as we slide into the last segment. But before that, Let's go ahead and take a final break. Stay with us, folks. We're coming into the last segment. Thanks for listening tonight, folks. Let's wrap up around what we've been talking about with the cities and the power that they're now exerting and the balkanization that we already have that's not working. We do have some models of things that can and do work. You look at what happened to Bud Light this year. I mean, it was fantastic. And it didn't have to be organized at a high level. This was organic, and people saw an opportunity to exercise their point of view in a meaningful way. Just like those leftists are doing on that special grand jury or the indicting grand jury. They feel like they're doing something which furthers their values. And for once, we actually did something meaningful in furtherance of our own values. But it shouldn't stop at a Bud Light. And you're not going to simply just boycott every leftist thing in the world. Again, that goes back to the powerless kind of balkanization where you just walk away from things at your own detriment and weaken yourself out of this blind idea of principle. And I do not ever advocate that as a strategy. That is a loser's strategy. But look at things like professional sports teams and look at how much the cities benefit from those financially. And you can't bring yourself to punish those sports teams which hate you. The NFL hates you. NASCAR hates you. Professional baseball, yeah, let's take away that All-Star game out of Atlanta. You know, you can't even fight back against the organizations which hate you. But have you ever stopped to think about how much money, extra money, in supporting those teams that you're giving directly to cities that hate you? Yeah, those cities built those stadiums. There's a symbiotic relationship between the cities and those professional sports organizations. And you, for some reason, can't Bud Light them? Well, you have to start thinking in those kind of terms, but you're thinking, Jared, the world is so crappy. Don't take baseball away from me. Don't take my football away. I need to watch that race on Sunday just to decompress from all of the crazy that's going on out there. And I sympathize with you. I mean, entertainment's a thing. I mean, even the troops in World War II had Bob Hope, for crying out loud. I don't expect you to not be joyful and entertained and find ways to enrich your soul, even as we fight for the soul of the nation. But we have to have parallel systems. Why do we have to continue to rely on these legacy sports teams through the legacy city arrangements? Why don't we start to ever build our own things? That's culture. And that's a parallel system. Well, and you start to see that happen once in a while, and then some people have to get pedantic and ruin it. Look at Oliver Anthony and his country song that went viral, The Rich Men North of Richmond. Now, that's somebody who's putting their heart and soul and spirit into a product that is also representing their point of view. They're doing both. They can live their life and try to build a livelihood while also furthering their values. But yet you had a bunch of people try to get pedantic about that, line by line in the lyrics, actually. Whether this lyric was too offensive or that lyric was too populist left for someone's taste. And missing the point that we have to have these parallel systems, just like these people in the cities who became part of the legacy systems that we kind of sort of built together, actually. Because, you know, you sent your kids off to the same government schools. You encouraged them to get educations. You told them that success in this world is getting a good job at a good company. And that sometimes to do those things, that means you have to put yourself behind the interest of the greater good of the company or the people around you or society. And in so many ways, you taught your kids to shut off their values in favor of values that leftists started pumping into those same institutions. Even as you were telling your kids, hey, better not fight on that. Could cost you in the long run. Is it really worth your job? Is it really worth getting a D in that class? You kind of set them up to not fight, and then you're surprised that they didn't fight, and then you're surprised that the leftists began to overwhelm those institutions. And while that was a mistake, and it would be nice to go back and redo a lot of that, that's just frankly not going to happen. But if we're going to get this system where, just like the Africanized bees, we begin to breed out the toxicity of these cities and the urbanites and their will to impose their values upon us, we can't do it by separating ourselves completely or being weak and passive and getting overrun. We have to start imparting our culture and values on them in the same way and not feeling guilty about it. Yes, you can actually tell people what it is that you think and not apologize for it. You have that freedom. It's inherent in the Constitution. It is a natural right which the Constitution protects, freedom of speech. And they're working to take it away by law now. And you pretend to care all the while you've been passive in exercising that right because it might get you in trouble. It might get you fired from your job. It might get you a D from that jerk professor in your college rhetoric class. And you remain silent and you remain passive. You're going to have to start getting tougher and putting it back on them and building parallel systems so that you can insulate yourself, but also exert power at the same time. But it begins with taking your freedom of speech back and saying, this is wrong, and I don't accept this, and we're not going to tolerate it, and we are going to fight you, and we're going to elect different people in our part of the country, but they're going to be just as aggressive against you as you have been against us. We may not get better than rhinos for now as the governor and attorney general and secretary of state of Georgia, because they decide to go in cahoots with the Democrats. But you know what? We could start to elect some really aggressive prosecutors in rural counties who pull a Fannie Willis and dare the system to say that they can't do it after she has set the precedent that it can be done. We have to work on those parallel systems. We're going to talk more about that this week, but that's the thought for now. Take back the cities, you take back the country. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to breed out those toxic characteristics of the cities little by little until they're like the killer bees and we don't have to worry about them in the same way anymore. In the meantime, I appreciate you listening tonight, and we're going to come back tomorrow night, and that's going to be a big part of the conversation. How do you set yourself up in parallel systems? How do you create your own strength from which to stand? People ask me about it all the time. We're going to talk more about it tomorrow. Come and listen. This is Command Briefing. I'm Jared A. Chambers. Thank you for being here.